Yes, welcome back class to yet another edition or another part of our teaching and learning series. And today we're going to look at a new topic from what we have been looking at compared to what we have been looking at before. And the topic today is the topic called fractions. So our topic today is the topic fractions. Now, before we even go into any details about the topic of fractions, it is best that we first understand what a fraction is. Now, number one, a fraction is a part of a whole item or quantity. I repeat, a fraction is a part of a whole item or a quantity. In other words, I can use a day-to-day example. If I have one big orange and I have 4 different boys, so I divide this big orange amongst these 4 boys. I get my orange and I divide it into 4 equal parts. So I give each of the 4 boys one piece, one piece, one piece. So I have my entire orange as a whole. Then I divide it into equal parts, into 4 equal parts. So each part of that orange is what we call a fraction of the whole orange. So if I have, if my whole orange is like this is my orange, and in my orange I divide it into 4 equal parts. I give the first boy this part, I give the second boy this part, I give the third boy this part, I give the fourth boy this other part. So each of these boys, for example, the first boy is going to take this one part. So this one part out of the total 4 is what we call a fraction of one boy compared to the whole of the orange. So I write it as 1 out of 4. In other words, 1 is the one piece which is taken by one boy out of the 4 entire parts, all the 4 different parts which have divided that orange into. So that is what we call a fraction. Or maybe if I have one sugar cane, one long sugar cane, and I divide this sugar cane amongst maybe 3 equal parts. So if I have my sugar cane in this format, this is my sugar cane, and I divide it into 3 equal parts. So after dividing it into 3 equal parts, I give 2 parts. I give 2 parts to 2 girls, and I remain with 1. Now, if I'm asked for the fraction which I gave to the 2 girls, in other words, the fraction of the shaded part is going to be the number of boxes which I've shaded here, which is 1, 2. So it is going to be 2 out of the total number of the parts which I divided the sugar cane into, which was 1, 2, and 3. So this and this are what we call fractions. We have said a fraction is a part of a whole item or a quantity. Now, the fractions have different parts. In other words, if I have a fraction such as this or this one, I read this as 1 out of 4 or a quarter. Then this I read it as 2 out of 3 or 2/3. This is this is a quarter or 1/4. Then this is 2/3 or 2 out of 3. Now, in every fraction has 2 parts. If I have a fraction, for example, like 3 out of 7 as my fraction, the upper part is what we call the numerator, whereas the downer part is what we call the denominator. Those are the 2 different parts of a fraction. The upper part being called the numerator. This is the numerator. Whereas the downer part is what we call the denominator. Upper part is the numerator, in other words, the 3 in this case is the numerator. Then the 7 which is down is what we call the denominator. Okay, so we are looking at the different types of fractions. Types of fractions. Now, under the different categories of fractions, number 1, we have what we call the proper fractions. Number one is the proper fractions. Now, the proper fractions are fractions whereby the numerator is less than the denominator. And remember, we said the numerator is the number on top, whereas the denominator is the number at the bottom. So proper fractions are fractions whereby the numerator is greater than, the numerator is less than the denominator. For example, if I have a fraction such as 2 out of 5. When I look at this fraction, I realize that my numerator, which is 2, is less than the denominator, which is 5. So this is what we call a proper fraction. Another example I can have maybe 7 out of 12. When I look at this, the numerator, which is 7, is less than the denominator, which is 12. So that is also a proper fraction. I can also have 1 out of 2, or a half. The numerator is less than the denominator. So these are examples of proper fractions. The second category of proper fractions is what we call the improper fractions. Second category, the improper fractions. Now, improper fractions are the opposite of proper fractions. Improper fractions are fractions whereby the numerator is greater than the denominator. I repeat, improper fractions are fractions whereby the numerator, in other words, the number which is on top, is greater than the number which is at the bottom, or the denominator. For example, if I have a fraction such as 5 out of 3, when I look at this fraction, I'll realize that my numerator, which is 5, is greater than the denominator, which is 3. So this means this is what you call an improper fraction. I can also have another one, maybe 8 out of 5. Now, my 8 is bigger than the 5. So that means that the numerator is greater than the denominator. So that kind of fraction is what you call the improper fraction. The last example maybe I can give, I can have maybe like 20 out of 11. So when you look at this number, you realize that the numerator is greater than the denominator. In other words, 20 is greater than 11. So all these are different examples of what you call the improper fractions. Category number 3 is what you call the mixed fractions. Mixed fractions. Now, a mixed fraction is a fraction that is made up of a whole number and a proper fraction. In other words, a mixed fraction is a combination of a whole number and a proper fraction. What I mean is this. If I have my fraction such as this, this is what I mean by a mixed fraction. It has a whole number, which is 1 in this case, and my proper fraction in this case is 2 out of 3. And we already defined what a proper fraction is. So we are saying that a mixed fraction is a fraction which is made up of a whole number and a proper fraction. Another example I can give in this case, I can have 3 whole number and 4 out of 5 maybe. So this is a mixed fraction because I realize I have a whole number which is 3. Then the 4 out of 5 is what you call the proper fraction. Now, a mistake which majority of the students make is when they are writing this, they put it at the same level of the 3. So instead of writing 3 whole number 4 out of 5, they write it in this category. They write it in this format. Now you must be very careful. This is not the same as this. So this one is wrong and this one is the correct way on how to write it. You write it in such a way that the whole number is big, whereas these others are small. And the numerator of the proper fraction should not be at the same level as what you see here, because you can see that where the whole number stops is where also the numerator stops, which is not supposed to be the case. So you're supposed to write it in this format and not in this format. So this is the correct way to write, this is the wrong way to write. So I've looked at the different examples of fractions, the proper fraction, the improper fraction, and the mixed fraction. So something else we can look at, maybe if they give you a shaded, if they give you a whole item or a whole thing, and they divide it into different parts, and they shade a given part, then they ask you to give the fraction of the shaded part. For example, if I have my item as this, the question here is, part 1 we have, what is the fraction of the shaded part? Remember, this is our diagram right here. Then part 2, what is the fraction of the unshaded part? Now, when we are looking for the fraction of the shaded part, you look at the number of squares which have been shaded, which is 1, 2. So the 2 becomes your numerator. Remember we said numerator is the number on top. So my fraction is going to be 2 out of, now I also look for the denominator. In other words, the number which is at the bottom. So the number at the bottom is the total number of pieces into which the whole of this thing has been divided. So my denominator is going to be, I count the total number of boxes, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So my denominator in this case is going to be 2 out of 4. So that is my fraction. 2 out of 4 becomes the fraction of the shaded part. In other words, how many squares out of the total number of squares have been shaded? We have seen that there are only 2 out of the total number of squares, which is 4. Then we come to the fraction of the unshaded part. Fraction of the unshaded part. So, unshaded part, I look at the number of squares which have not been shaded, which is 1 and 2. So the number of squares which have not been shaded become my numerator. So I'll have 2. I'm going to have 2 as my numerator. Divide by, the denominator is still going to be the total number of boxes into which this thing has been divided. So the total number of squares you have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 4 becomes my denominator. So my fraction of the unshaded part is 2 out of 4. My fraction of the shaded part is also 2 out of 4. Now, I'm going to leave you with one question which you'll try out. Given my circle here, divided into 3 equal parts, so my question number 1 is going to be, what is the fraction? What is the fraction of the shaded parts? And 2 is going to be what is the fraction of unshaded parts. So this is the question you're going to try out. I have this as my item. It is divided into 3 equal parts. So the question is, what is the fraction of the shaded part? The second question is, what is the fraction of the unshaded part? So you try out that one, and I believe you're going to understand more as you keep on practicing.